I feel like older generations classify any sort of pushback as just disobedience and disrespect. And as a result, it's caused a lot of strain in people's relationships with their elders. Whether you want to look at the relationships that they have with their parents or their uncles or grandparents, anything like that, or even in the professional world. It's like there's this big disconnect between an employee that's maybe millennial Gen Z and then someone that's a Gen X baby boomer. Their style of work is different. Their quote unquote work ethic is different. And when our work ethic as Gen Z and millennials doesn't match up with the work ethic of the older generations, then we're looked at as lazy. We're looked at as incompetent. And I really want to talk about how the older generations are so stuck in their ways to the point that their stubbornness is now also having implications on newer generations. But before I do that, I want to talk about how this idea of disobedience is weaponized against children, against a, against a child and a parent-child relationship. I specifically want to talk about it also from a cultural lens because I think it's also very culture dependent. I think a lot of immigrant households are very prone to this. And it comes from this idea, it comes from this cycle from the generations before them that looked at certain roles in a family dynamic as infallible roles. The father's a provider, and he can absolutely do no harm. He's not expected to be emotionally present for his child. He's just expected to bring the bread home. And the wife or the mother is just expected to cook, clean, wipe their kids' asses, be obedient to their husband, whatever twist or lens you want to look at the obedience factor. But it was essentially set up in a manner where the idea of teamwork and cooperation was lost, and now it just became a hierarchical thing. And in that hierarchical thing, it came to a point where women were overly criticized and men weren't criticized enough. And this isn't just me pandering. I think this is true throughout history that men and women were looked at differently in society. And that's not a bad thing. Like a man and a woman bring different things to the table. The issue arises when we are excusing behaviors of one gender over the other. And I feel like in today's day we're kind of seeing a reverse of that. Where now on social media, at least from again my anecdotal experience, men are now being overly criticized, and I wouldn't say women are being criticized enough, but the ramp up on the criticism of men, and then the consistent overly criticism of the women, has now just created this gender war. Men and women hate each other. They look at each other as competition, and this all stems back to older generations and how they condition people into how they are supposed to view relationships. And I feel like religion was used a lot. Religion and culture were used as a way of weaponization that would essentially fearmonger, guilt trip the child. I'm sorry, the child in the parent-child relationship, and we've seen the implications of that long term. So now we're at a position where people are kind of sick and tired of this guilt tripping. They're sick and tired of this fear mongering. They're sick and tired of being told just straight up wrong information about faith or misconflated information about their culture. And now to the point that both faith and culture get intertwined and now both lose their merit. I think we're getting to a point where people are sick of that. But as a result, what that does is that it's causing a I guess you could say a disconnect, and it's leaving a lot of people in identity crises and all of these things. So I want to tackle this in multiple different ways. So I think first it's important that we understand the context behind the older generations and how they were raised. Then I want to talk about the implications that that's had on us, and how we can fix it. Those are the three things I'm going to talk about. So number one, understanding where they came from. Older generations did not have access to mental health resources and education the way that we do. So as a result, a lot of these things that we can now identify as traumas and negative behaviors that have just been reinforced, that now have negative implications, they didn't know these are going to be negative implications. They didn't know that these behaviors cause generations worth of issues. For them, it was just a normal Tuesday. It wasn't anything for them to truly think about, ponder on. And it's funny to me when older generations use that as an argument in support of themselves. That, oh, this was just normal for us. Normal doesn't make it good. Like during the early times of Islam, the polytheists used to bury their newborn daughters. That was a normal thing to do. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. And so that idea of that, oh, it was just normal for us, using it in a way of supporting your arguments rather than just using it as a justification or context and nuance, it blows my mind. But old generations do this a lot. So a father being absent emotionally and being overly, honestly, just abusive at points, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, verbally, whatever that may be. And then the mother then overburdening her children with emotional responsibilities because she couldn't confide in her husband, and she couldn't confide in her parents either because her parents also followed the same trend. So now you have an emotionally unavailable father. You have an emotionally unregulated and emotionally volatile mother. So the children are growing up in this environment where is nothing but instability. There's nothing but emotional volatility. They don't know what they're going to be coming home to after a day of school. They're not going to know what to expect when their dad walks through the door. They're not going to know how family vacations go, if they even ever go on vacations. They're not going to know what to expect. Everything becomes unknown. And as a result of this, anxiety builds. A huge level of anxiety builds because most of our anxieties lie in the unknown. When you're constantly in a state of unpredictability, that is where your anxiety is typically going to rise up the most. So now it leaves you in this constant anxious state, this constant stressful state, because you have no idea what to expect. And as a result, that prolonged, that continuous state of anxiety and stress, especially in your adolescent years and your most developmental years, it'll translate over to the rest of your life. So that's how that cycle just continues. And then with previous generations not addressing these things, it just allowed that cycle to continue over and over and over again. So now we're to a point where Gen X and maybe some baby boomers as well, they have children. Oh, what? They have children. They have kids that are millennials, Gen Z, and now we're at a point in our time where we have access to mental health resources. We're taught and we're educated on the effects of depression, of anxiety. We have classes, we have majors in universities like psychology, sociology that specifically study these kind of dynamics. We have social media now, and people will use their education to go and then educate the mass. We have more overall access to education, and we have more of an influx of people wanting to spread that education. It's kind of weird now that I think about it, because the older generations didn't have that, but they also had a very large sense of community. Whereas I feel like now in the real world, our generations are less communal, at least in the physical realm, the physical world. Whereas this idea of going on these platforms and educating people, I would say is an argument for a communal thing. It's crazy how that works, but I'm not gonna get into that right now because I have to think about that. I just cooked up off the dome. So we covered the context. Why do these type of parents exist? Why does this tyranny of parenting exist? We've talked about the implications. Now let's talk about how we can fix that. I think millennials and Gen Z are doing a good job at taking steps in the right direction to fixing these things by continuously encouraging conversation, continuously encouraging I think I said education already. But I think that's 90% of the pie. I think that other 10%, even though a lot smaller but still vital, is building that comfort to have vulnerable conversations. And specifically, I want to talk about men here. I think women in general are just more emotional creatures, so they will have a lot more emotional conversations with their friends. Guys will label anyone as a friend and will claim that, oh, I don't need to ask him about whatever, because that's not what guys do, which I feel like is a horrible way to look at relationships, a horrible way to look at friendships. Because when you don't train that skill, when you don't train that part of your brain to be able to process, articulate your feelings, you're going to be a horrible partner in a relationship. And even though I'm addressing the men specifically right now, this is also common in women. When you grow up in these emotionally volatile households, it has implications on both the man and the woman, the son and the daughter. But I think that emotional unavailability, I think, is more common in a man than it is a woman, at least from my, again, anecdotal experience. So I think a huge way that we can also address this issue is by having those conversations and building safe spaces to have these conversations. The one thing I tell people all the time is that if you cannot talk to your boys, if you cannot talk to your girls about things that are going on in your life with a full peace of mind when you're having these conversations, you need new friends. Because sure, playing pickleball or studying together or getting food is cool and all, but it gets to a point where a friend needs to do what a friend does, which is being there for your friend. And if not only does one person not know how to communicate, but then the rest of the friends don't know how to be there. So everyone's just in this state of ignorance of, I don't know how to be a good friend. Do you think that's going to translate over well into your relationships? Absolutely not. And the same thing applies for women as well. If you cannot have these conversations with the people in your circle now, putting a ring on somebody's finger is not going to solve that. It's not going to change anything. If anything, it's just going to amplify the issue. And all you now do is just repeat the cycle of the previous generations. So encouraging these conversations is very important. One thing that I try to do with my platform is to encourage that conversation. Whether it's leaving comments, whether it's soon signing up for coaching, I'm gonna start a little coaching thing. So if you ever want to talk, hit up that link. I'll let y'all know when it's live. But that's in the works. But it's important because this level of articulation is a skill. You have to train it, and I feel like it's best to train it when the stakes are relatively low, than when you have a wife and kids or you have a husband and children in the picture. But I don't think a lot of people look at it that way. I think our generations are doing a better job of looking at it that way, but I still think it's an issue. And I really want to touch on this point of repeating cycles. I was gonna make this a separate video, but I think this we can encompass this into one video, where we see people complain about the older generations. They're stuck in their ways. They're too stubborn. They're too judgmental. They're too material focused. They're too image driven. Whatever it is, yada yada yada. You'll throw these things at the older, which is all true. They're all true. Most of them are true. But now we're repeating that cycle, but just in our own font. So instead of the older generations, at least like I'm gonna talk from a South Asian lens, the aunties are moving away from talking about these beautiful saris that they bought or what vacations that their husbands taking them on, or what churian bangles and what jewelry they have, to now I got these many followers on social media. I drive this car. I go to this school. I do this. I do that. And then the judgment part also starts when you grow up and you see your mom talking to all these other aunties about bullshit. That's going to result to you going to your friends talking about bullshit, and that cycle repeats. So now, when you were so critical, mom, auntie, why are you guys always just talking about other people? Why don't you just go get a life, touch some grass? You are now doing the same thing. And of course, the same thing will happen for men. But I feel like the things that men flaunt is still the same thing. I think the only difference now is that a lot of the guys will just flaunt shit that they didn't actually achieve themselves. But they'll still flaunt the cars, the watches, whatever it is, the material things, or how many girls they got on their phone, how many bodies they got. These are all things that I think guys have always tried to brag since the beginning of time. But I think it's funny now because now the bragging isn't, oh, I did this, I did that. It's because your pops bought it for you. Let's be honest. But now this cycle is continued. So now when we sat there for so long and criticized these elders of these things, we are now doing it ourselves. And again, it's funny because the people that call us out get ostracized for it. And it makes me think, when I used to think a lot in like a generalization sense for older generations, that, how did no one ever just be, was there no auntie or no uncle at any point that was like, you motherfuckers are actually so draining to be around. You guys are actually so exhausting. You guys are actually so lame. I used to think, was there no one that ever thought like that? But now I have a feeling that there were, but they just got silenced out. They got silenced. They got drowned out in what became the norm to just be what we know now as a typical brown auntie or typical brown uncle. And this, of course, translates to other cultures as well, other communities as well, but I'm not going to speak for them because I'm brown, bro. And also it's funny because I personally didn't grow up around any brown people. I didn't grow up around Desis. I grew up around black people and Hispanic folks. And the way that they do drama is very different than how brown people do it, at least from my experience. I didn't start being exposed to more people from my background until I was about 17, 18 years old. And it was a huge culture shock for me because I didn't realize how childish everyone seems to be. And it's funny, I had a conversation about this with one of my friends recently. And I was telling them about how it's been so hard for me to acclimate with now being around these people that are visibly repeating cycles. And it's so exhausting and so draining for me personally because I sit here and think, yo, we're all grown. How are we still acting like this? We're grown. We used to complain about this stuff and now we're repeating the cycles. And one thing he said to me was that this is just normal. This is just a normal Tuesday for everybody. It's crazy how that all kind of ties back. It's just a normal Tuesday. So when I tell him about something that might have happened or whatever, or my thoughts on a certain situation, he said, like, yo, it's just normal for us. And we grew up around this, so we're acclimated, we're used to this kind of behavior. Because for someone like you that wasn't exposed to this, the type of drama and confrontation that you dealt with is very different than how Desis do their confrontation and drama. And now you're also at a point where you're healing through all that. You're trying to get away from all that. And you're also around people, your close circle, that don't engage in that kind of stuff anyways. But now you come to these environments, you come to these circles. It doesn't surprise me that you're having a hard time acclimating. Because everyone else grew up around it. You didn't. So, of course, you're not going to be able to acclimate. And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you not being able to acclimate is not necessarily a bad thing. Because you're kind of at that point where do you even really want to truly acclimate with this kind of behavior in the first place? And he really made me think about that. Because I really felt growing up that I wanted to be more immersed in my culture. And what I felt like was a huge part of that immersion was being around my people. And then as I started becoming more and more surrounded by them, I realized that, oh my God, I actually hate this. And it's not to hate on anyone, it's not to throw shade at anybody. It's genuinely like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And I feel like a huge implication of that is because I sat there and I expected people to meet me where I'm at. But that's just not possible. And like I talked about in my previous video, it's at that point where I was exposed to the ugliness of life way earlier than everyone else around me. So how can I possibly expect them to be where I'm at? The things that I know now, at 21, they'll know when they're 30 and 40 years old. So why am I trying to bring myself down to that? And why am I expecting people to meet me where I'm at when me meeting them is regressing like fuck, and them meeting me is unknown territory. They don't even know this level exists. And that's not me boasting myself and whatever. It's just in the reality. But it's sad. It really is sad. It really is unfortunate that we have to witness this in front of our eyes right now, that, oh my God, more than half of these people that I run into on a daily basis that I see are just going to be the next generation of typical brown uncles and aunties. Because I really feel like our generation has the capacity, has the capabilities to be able to break out of these chains. But in order to break out of these chains, to break out of these cycles, you're going to have to have uncomfortable conversations with those elders and yourself. And I just feel like the vast majority of people are just on autopilot. They don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. Damn. They don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. They just want to continue to live in their blissful ignorance. And it's sad. It really is unfortunate. But as long as I continue to have the health to talk, I'm still going to try my best and address these stigmas, irrespective of what people are going to say and irrespective of the flack that I get. I already get enough on my TikTok, but nothing's going to change. But I think it is important to now look at us now at our age and say, oh my God, we are becoming that older generation. And we're going to pass on traumas. We're going to pass on cycles that shouldn't be passed on. And what can we do so we can be conscious and make a conscious effort to not bring this along with us? But I don't know. I'm not going to hold anybody's hand. I'm not going to tell anybody how to live their life. But it isn't just an observation, just like all of my other takes are. All my socials should be in the description, in my link tree. Go fuck with all that. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Get used to this.